Good evening, everybody. This is Module 12, EDL 850, Copyrights and the Computer Case Study. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. Section 1, I will talk a little bit about a summary of the case study. Let's explore the 5 W's. We're going to start with what. What is happening in the case study? St. Regis School District have a dilemma in their hands with teachers have different opinions about copyright violations. Mrs. Brendan is worried about the school violating copyright issues. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lynn argued that the president of the PTA got her back and she is doing the district and parents a service by making multiple copies of new software to be installed in all classrooms, which will be save the district a lot of money and benefit the school community. What didn't happen? Mr. Sample mentioned to Mrs. Lynn that making copies of the software was a copyright violation, but did not propose any solution or possible decision when it comes to the school violating copyrights laws. Basically, a lot of unanswered questions from the case study so far. Who is involved in the case study? Mr. Semple, the school principal for 3 years, compiled a list of instructional softwares. Mrs. Lin, the school library media specialist that made copies of the computer software based on suggestions from other teachers. Mrs. Brandon, a third grade teacher new to the district, argued that making copies of the software violates copyright law. Mrs. Evans, PTA president, helped make copies of the computer softwares. And then Mrs. Williams, experienced teacher at St. Regis School, who also supported Mrs. Lynn. When? There was no mention of specific dates in the case study, but 4 months after the new instructional software were installed at the school library, teachers approached Mrs. Lynn with the idea to copy the softwares to classroom computers. So now instead of going to the library, teachers can have their own individual software in a flash drive for their own classroom. Where is this happening? St. Regis Community School District serves students grade to 8, has 2 grocery store, 1 drugstore. It's in a rural community. Why? The school has a small budget, 2 major fundraising a year. Will the new principal side with the teachers and PTA or listen to the new teachers concerned about copyright violation? Opinions and facts. Mr. Semple informed Mrs. Lynn that copying the computer software is a violation of copyright law. Mrs. Lynn does not think it's a big deal and that she is saving the district money and no one will ever find out. Mrs. Brendan, her old job at another school district, had strict rules against making copies of copyrighted materials and thinks that St. Regis is violating copyright laws by making copies of the computer software. The research, according to the research, any copies made for students must be separately allotted under fair use or with permission of the copyright holder. Section 2. Legal or ethical issues. Legal. St. Regis School could be held liable for making copies of software purchased by the school for teachers throughout the building without the publisher consent. Ethical. Mrs. Lynn thinks that she's not doing anything wrong. Instead, she thinks she's helping the district by helping them save money. Who was harmed? No one yet was harmed, but school district can face legal consequences if copyright violation are discovered, which could hinder the school's future success. Breach of contract. There is a violation of copyright laws by making copies of softwares without the publisher's permission. Discrimination and harassment. There is no discrimination or harassment presented in the case study. Lastly, the action of Mr. Sample can go 2 ways. If he allows teachers to continue to use individual copies of the software, that could promote more resources for students to use in the classroom. However, if they are caught, they will be held liable, which can hinder the future success of the school by having lawsuits and school with software reputation damage. Section 3. What has happened? St. Regis School received funding for a new software program in the school library. Mrs. Lynn, with the help of Mrs. Williams, copied the new software to flash drive to give each teacher a copy to use in the classroom. Mrs. Brandon, based on her experience at the whole job, reported the copyright violation to the principal, Mr. Sample. When Mr. Sample confronted Mrs. Lynn, she argued that it's not a big deal since they are a small rural district and no one will find out, and said she's actually helping the school by saving them money and expanding their resources. Now, section 4, we're going to evaluate the missing facts from the case. Let's start with places. The school district is in a rural community that serves grades to 8, but there was no other facts about the specific location of this school district. For example, which state it's located in, what is the name of the city, how is the economy there. Those information could have helped with the context in the case. Then, program. New software program purchased by the PTA. How much does that software cost? Are there any other software that the school used prior to this? What is the school internet acceptable use policy? This will have helped us to understand the basis of the case study better. People. We have Mrs. Semple, the school principal for 3 years, Mrs. Lynn, the school library media specialist, Mrs. Brendan, third grade teacher, new to the district, Mrs. Evans, PTA president, Mrs. William, experienced teacher at St. Regis School. Missing information. The case focused mainly on the three main characters, Mrs. Semple, Mrs. Lynn, and Mrs. Brendan. There was really little information about Mrs. Williams and Mrs. Evans. Also, more information about students' demographic will help us understand the case better. For example, how much free and reduced, how much students qualify for free and reduced lunch. Section 5, review and prioritize the information. Conflicts impact on stakeholders. If the issue is not addressed by Mr. Semple, the school could be sued. We can have a bad image of the school reputation and culture. Individual stakes based on the outcome. Mr. Semple, Mrs. Lane, PT, and the entire school community will be affected. Consultation. Not all stakeholders have been consulted. There is no information on students, other teachers, and other parents' opinion about the issue. Learning. I would like to know the district internet acceptable use policy. Also, I would like to know what was Mr. Sample response to Mrs. Lynn rebuttal when confronted about the copyright violation. Decision. I have enough information to make a decision in this case. Whether if teachers knew or not about the copyright infringement, we are clearly violating copyright laws. Section 6, creating a plan to improve and develop. Option 1, no action is taken. Do nothing and follow Mrs. Lynn's approach to continue to make copies since this is a small rural school. Who cares about them and they will never get caught. Option 2, intermediate. Destroy all the flash drive copies of the software, provide a school district professional development and copyright issues, and revisit or create a district internet acceptable use policy. Revert back to using the software in the library where each class can sign up for a time slot in the library. Option 3, super aggressive, suspend Mrs. Lane if she refuses to stop making copies of copyrighted materials. Notify the publisher of the copyright violation immediately and accept all the consequences. Contact PTA to get more funding for licensed use of the software for individual classroom use. Evaluating the action plan. Option 1, if no action was taken. Pros. No hassle, and teachers can keep receiving individual copies for classroom use. Cons. Tension between Mrs. Brandon, the new teacher, and veteran teacher Mrs. Lynn. School could be sued for copyright violation. Option 2, intermediate. Pro. Teachers will be aware of copyright laws and the school will no longer violate copyright laws. Cons. Even if the copies are destroyed, the publisher may still find out. Very inconvenient since only the library will have the software, which is not an effective way to target every student. Option 3, pro, sending a strong message about the severity of violating copyright laws. Teachers will be trained on copyright laws. Cons, time consuming if the publishing company decides to sue. It could be costly for the school to hire lawyers, train teachers, and change ways for providing legal copies of the software to all teachers. Section 8, reflect and choose the best option. Intermediate. Based on the information we have, the best option would be option 2, the intermediate approach to the solution. Since there was no mention of the school internet acceptable use policy, this is a good opportunity to create this policy, and we will train all staff on copyright laws. This decision seems to be the most ethical way to get teachers to adhere to copyright laws moving forward and ensure students' success and well-being. Although destroying the flash drive can be discovered, but it's very unlikely that will happen, and this option will prevent the school from facing legal consequences, which will ensure students' success and well-being. The PTA can go back to the drawing board and find an effective way to get proper licensing for publishers to make copies for teachers to use. This option requires all students and adults to be consulted as they will be trained on copyrights, laws, and policies. How do we implement the plan? Section 9. Step 1. I will create a committee to help gather and collect all copies of the teacher softwares and properly discard them so it is done properly. Step 2. The administrative staff will create an internet acceptable use policy to be presented to staff. Step 3. Conduct a professional development on copyright laws and encourage teachers to include that topic in their lessons. Step 4. Meet with the PTA to introduce the Internet Acceptable Use Policy and brainstorm ways we can raise money to help buy licenses for the copies for software programs for all teachers to use. Consequences. Mrs. Lane can refuse to comply and destroy the illegal software copies. The PTA can say they don't have enough funds for getting new licenses of the software. The principal, school board, Mrs. Lin, and other teachers and PTA members will be affected by this decision. I will need help of the administrative staff to send to I will need help of the administrative staff to meet with Mrs. Lin to properly address the copyright violation since the contravention of the law does not apply yet. If the original plan does not work, I would choose option 3, which was the most aggressive approach, where Mrs. Lin will be disciplined and the school will be notified. The school will notify the publishers of the copyright violation in order to protect the school culture. Section 10. Standards and relevancy. My case study correlates to the standard because I was able to use information from a past case study to create, design, and implement an action plan and process for improvement about copyrights laws, and policy. These assignments may be analyze a case study, find missing information, interpret and develop an action plan to provide solution to the dilemma presented in this case. In order to do that, I had to gather data using technology, explore previous modules about copyright policies, and communicate information in order to enhance the success of the school by protecting them from committing copyright infringement. I think this assignment is relevant to my current learning because this semester I was learning about the importance of school law. I was able to analyze and reflect on a case study about the process of evaluating if a school is violating a school law such as copyright infringement. This will impact what I will do as an educator because I will make sure I am following school laws and take any violation serious. This assignment will impact my future as a building principal because I know exactly what to do if a staff member was to report possible school law violations. I will first create a solid action plan. I can use this assignment as a template to follow in developing this plan. I will make sure I get a group of stakeholders, teachers, parents, staff, and students involved in the decision-making process. Also, this assignment made me realize the importance of knowing school laws and policies. The first thing I will do as a future leader is to reevaluate my school law and policies about copyrights and acceptable internet use policy. Then I will make sure I conduct professional development about copyright infringement and internet acceptable use, and I encourage teachers to incorporate those topics into their lessons.